Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below in the comment section, and that's where I pick from each week. I think there's some, 100 plus comments most weeks on this video, and I pick between 20 and 24, and I try to, again, pick some that are relevant to whatever is going on at that time. At this point, obviously it's cold outside, so a lot of the questions are about it being cold outside, or being winter, or planting in the winter, or whatever, mulching in the winter. Holly is out here with me. I don't know if she'll end up in the frame at some point, but she is out enjoying the cold morning, but not as cold as it has been. I think we're about 33 or something here early in the morning on Friday. Merry Christmas to everyone, because this will be up on Christmas Eve. There are just one more week on the $60 discount on the Learn to Garden video series. Thank you so much to everybody who has purchased it over the last year as I've been building out this Learn to Garden video series over on my website, HortTube.com. That $60 discount is good for another through the end of December. The video that's going up, if you haven't seen it yet, it'll probably be as this video is going up. Those of you should get a notice that I put up a video on the Learn to Garden video series, and it's actually about visiting gardens. And I went over to the Ralston and talk through all the things that I can see over there that can be of winter interest in the garden. So I think that's a pretty good video for the Learn to Garden video series. And then of course I'll have all the videos linked down below that where we have visited other gardens around the country on the channel over the years. So that's how that Learn to Garden video series works. You get a video about something, and then all the videos that relate to that I've put up on the main channel. I think she just walked through and you can see her. Maybe you can see her, just her rear end right now. Okay, let's see. I put up a video on the unboxing all of these plants. I am completely surrounded by plants from the Southern Living Plant Collection, Encore Azaleas. Here's the variegated Encore Azalea that's still in bloom. Forever Goldie Arborvitae there, and tons of plants out here that I unboxed from the Southern, this week. Several other videos went up as well, including a Big Five, what I call the Big Five video, and it's just about the 5 pieces of maintenance that you have to do in a garden after you've kind of got it installed. The weeding, mulching, watering, pruning, fertilizing part of gardening. That video will have gone up before this one. So let's just jump into some questions. All right. Somebody said, will you be walking viewers through our design process about all of the redesign of the design of the front foundation? Yes, for sure. There's also probably sometime before this next week is over, you're going to see me tear out a lot of the things that are in the front of the fence out by the road. So the fence, I put up that fence, I don't know, it's probably 2 years ago now in this series of videos at this house. I've never been real happy with everything that's gone in on the other side of it. So a lot of that stuff's coming out in a video and talking through how we're, redoing that. And having a few more evergreen things out there. Again, I always talk about winter should look like winter, but it looks too much like winter, and it's the greeting, it's the area people pull up to or walk up to. It's the very first impression you have of this garden. It's too many dormant perennials this time of year. So there'll still be perennials that go to sleep out there, but there'll be a few more evergreen things blended into it. But yes, absolutely, and changes back here as well. So somebody said, what are the pros and cons of splitting big attached bulbs? So I put up, I think, 3 separate videos on planting pansies. Planted pansies with tulips, planted pansies with daffodils in a couple different places. The daffodils I had gotten from Color Blends, a lot of them were not only a bulb with a little bulblet attached to it where it was making a new bulb, they were 2 full-size bulbs, really. So I could have easily popped them in half and planted them separately. There's really no pros or cons to it. If you want them to not crowd themselves out as quickly and not need to be popped out of the ground and divided, you can go ahead and divide them as you're putting them in the ground. So it give you, probably some period of time longer, because at some point, if your bulbs are thriving and they're colonizing, it is probably best to pop them out of the ground at some point and break them apart, spread them out into other places, share them with neighbors or whatever. But going into the ground, there's no con to not breaking them apart, other than, it's like a free bulb, and you could plant maybe more bulbs somewhere else as a pro. But there's no real con to have just left them together. But I could easily just pop them apart, and I've done that many times. I've left daffodil bulbs out of the ground. I've dug daffodil bulbs up, thrown them into a bucket, forgotten about them, and like months later, gone back and planted them and had them come back. They're really kind of rugged overall bulbs. I'm not encouraging that, but it's something. I dug out a bunch one time and threw them into an area next to the fence at the old house, and then just covered them in leaves while I did another project. Forgot about them, and they came up, through the leaves as if they had been planted in the ground. So pretty tough plants. Somebody asked, what in the future projects am I looking forward to the most? I guess just getting some of these projects out of the way that I talked about early on in the videos, because what I didn't anticipate was right as this project started, that COVID lockdown would happen, and then all the prices of everything would go so high. So again, just residing the house was 1.5 years, 2 years after I had wanted to do that. I've still got to paint the foundation here. The back fence back there, the only reason, I had it to the point where it was just ready to go in, and then, lumber prices were so high, I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. And so there's just getting caught up, because inflation just kind of drove everything to an extreme there, that it'd just be nice to have things knocked out that I said I was going to do, because it's weird to it's not, it's okay if you're at home doing your gardening project and you tell yourself, this spring I'm going to tackle that project, and then you don't get to it because you only disappointed yourself, right? But when you have a YouTube channel and you throw it out to like, hey, 20,000 people, here's something I'm going to do, and then you don't do it, that's a little weird. So I'd like to get just caught up, to where I said I was going to be a long time ago. From there, I have a much, the channel will evolve here at some point, and I have a pretty grandiose plan long term that you guys will see evolve, and I'm just going to leave it right there. So I do offer consultations as well, and it's another thing that's over on my website, is you can buy a 50-minute consultation with me, or buy a gift card for somebody else to have a consultation with me if you're looking for a last-minute gift as well. And somebody just had made a comment last week that they got a consultation from me 2.5 years ago, and their garden is looking gorgeous, and they're going to send before and after photos for the before and after video at some point. So thank you. We just have to turn around and take a look at where Holly is at some point here. Holly? Hey! What are you doing over there? Huh? What are you doing over there? She's behind the shed. I think maybe you can see her walking out here. No, she's going to take a different turn. Okay, she's enjoying the garden paths. I got a weird one on another video that just said, why not 10-10-10? I guess I had talked about fertilizing in another video, and so I wrote that one down. It wasn't part of the Q&A from last week, but I just thought it was an interesting question. So, when I was a kid, we fertilized our vegetable garden with 10-10-10. Back then, what the fertilizer numbers mean, for those of you who don't know, those 3 numbers are the big macronutrients of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Then the fertilizer may or may not have other micronutrients as well. And that would be calcium and boron and manganese and magnesium and so on and so forth. Lots of other things that plants need as well. They just don't necessarily need them in the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So 10-10-10 fertilizer means that 10% of the bag is nitrogen. So if you bought a 50-pound bag, it used to come in 50-pound bags, 10% of the bag was nitrogen. That means, what is that? 5 pounds of the bag is nitrogen, and 5 pounds of the bag is phosphorus, and 5 pounds of the bag is potassium. And that's what we would sling out. You plant your vegetables, you throw out 10-10-10. You plant your grass seeds, you throw out 10-10-10. Back then, it was all fast releasing 10-10-10. There is 10-10-10 now or similar fertilizers that are in a slow release. version so that they last a little bit longer. They only release when it's raining or when it's warm or whatever. So there are variations of it. Used to be super, super inexpensive. You could get a 50-pound bag of 10-10-10 for $4. Now it's 15 or more. It's not super, super inexpensive anymore. But one of the issues here, and this is just, if you throw 10-10-10 out on a vegetable garden or on your annuals or on your shrubs, they're going to grow fast. I mean, that nitrogen that's in there is going to produce that green growth, that makes things look like they're growing, super fast and they're super healthy. But growing things too fast a lot of times can draw in insect problems. I've talked about this. All that new tender growth that you're pushing. And a lot of times what appears healthy is not. And I think I made this comparison years ago, or one of these Q&As in the past, is like you find this person who, you see jogging all over the place and you just assume they're the healthiest person in the world, and then, something happens to them and you realize that visually you saw this person as this super healthy, dynamic person who jogs or does whatever that they do, but then you can't look at something and tell whether it's sick or not. That's my point here, okay? So saying that the plant's growing fast is your only determination as to whether it's healthy or not is not necessarily a good gauge, okay? Because if it's, you'll find that those plants that are growing that fast are also end up under attack from disease and insect problems, because it's an unnatural state to be growing, to be pushed that hard. You're pushing your body too hard, pushing everything too hard, and then you become vulnerable to issues. That's the point. So that's the thing with the nitrogen part of just, let me go sling out 5 pounds of nitrogen, around the back garden and see, how fast I can make everything grow. The other two, the phosphorus and the potassium, those actually are pretty stable in the soil. Okay, so the issue with throwing out a bag that's 10% phosphorus and a bag that's 10% potassium is, do you need that much phosphorus and potassium? You should if you're going to throw those out repeatedly, at some point you need to get a soil test and make sure that you're not overdoing the phosphorus and the potassium. You may need phosphorus or potassium. So the whole question about why not 10-10-10 is because, number one, I don't want to push things that hard, and number two, because the nitrogen forms that are in these bags are quick acting. It doesn't go through the process of feeding the microbes and letting the microbes feed the plants, that kind of natural circle that we normally have of leaves dropping off of trees, and then maybe earthworms break those leaves down some, and then the beneficial bacteria and the beneficial fungi take over, and then they bring water and nutrients from our soils, from the rock that our soils are made out of, and bring those things to the plants as they need them and as the plant requests them. And in exchange for that, the plant produces sugars from the sun that feed those things under the ground, and that's how the system works. You throw 10-10-10 out there, you immediately disrupt the system by making the plant just grow directly from that nitrogen source. So there's that, and then again, you're just going to at some point overdo the phosphorus and the potassium. Those things should be put down based on soil tests. And so that's the why not 10-10-10. Again, when I was a kid, everything I ever ate from our vegetable garden was grown, being force-fed fertilizer, basically. And I just, I grow my vegetables slow and steady, and I have plenty. And I also find that I have vegetables well into late summer and early fall. And as a kid, boy, we had torn that garden out by, mid to late July pretty much every year. And we're thinking about planting collards and fall crops, at that point later. I think we just pushed it to the point of, running it out of steam, honestly. Anyway, there's some thoughts on non-organic fertilizers. And I use just organic fertilizers, which have a small amount of these things. They've got a little bit of these things, these micronutrients in them and macronutrients in them, but not very much. I'm letting the compost and the mulch and all do that rest of that. Okay, that's a long answer. That was the fifth question. So in the leaf video, I think maybe that's gone up this week, about how I handle the leaves out here, which is mainly just keeping these paths cleaned off of leaves and leaving the rest of them in the beds. One thing I failed to talk about in that video, which was kind of weird, is how thick I would leave them. I would not have 6 or 8 inches of leaves back here in any spot. So I do, under this giant oak back here, have to go back in here and pull some of these out, and I'll use them somewhere else. In that video, I showed either mulching them with a mower or mulching them with one of these machines that you can buy, gas or electric machines that you can buy to shred the leaves if you want to. I leave most of mine whole. There's life on those leaves. One of the questions I got was, insect-related problems. I don't have any insects from these leaves, no problems from these leaves, because sometime around the 1st of February, when we get slightly warmer days, the robins come through here and flip every leaf over. I sit out here on this porch sometimes and just, you can listen to it. They will literally flip every leaf over here. I don't know how many times over the course of a month of February and early March. They will hunt everything down out there that would be damaging to these plants. They won't get everything, but they'll get the vast majority of it. So I don't find that I have any more insect problems, because the birds, it invites the birds in here in the late winter. It's what they do. They rummage through these leaves in order to find things to feed their young as they're building nests and doing their spring things. Holly's in front of me. She wants to go in. Another question that got repeated on that video was, what do I do in the spring? By that time, the vast majority of it has broken down. Not all of it, but a good amount of it has, and I just mulch right over the top of it. But I talk about in the big 5 video, that I don't mulch like 3 or 4 inches of mulch. I put down a small amount of mulch. Those leaves are part of my mulching. So I consider them to be part of the thickness of my mulch, and I just put basically a decorative cap over the top of the leaves, is what I would call it. So been a lot of questions of just about the channel, the actual YouTube channel, over the last couple of weeks. And somebody said, what is the biggest contributor to the growth of your channel audience? I don't really know. I don't necessarily know the answer to that. When I started this channel, I had no thought that I would be standing here talking to this camera 6 years later. I started making videos from my garden center with just some of the basic plants that I sold at my garden center, so that at the end of a sale, I could just say, hey, I've got a video on YouTube for that. And then people started watching from other places. And then I ended up having a conversation with the Southern Living Plant Collection. And now I'm, going to shows for them, presenting new plants for them, doing all kinds of things for them, and then shooting videos for this, YouTube channel and all these things. I think it's just the consistency of it, I'm guessing, overall, and just, this is who I am. I'm not really, I don't turn on the camera and go, I need to be different. I need to do this. I'm not doing something that I wouldn't normally do, or have these same conversations with customers at my garden center or whatever, teaching people. I've always, taught people. And I've always, for whatever reason, when I had my space at the farmer's market in Raleigh, a lot of the other nurserymen that were there would ask me questions. I knew pretty early on that I could communicate these things, fairly well, long before YouTube came along. These concepts, how do you say them to somebody in a way that they can take it home and understand it in some sort of way? So I kind of knew that. And I guess that's just knowing what you can or can't do, or your base of knowledge. So if I was going to start a YouTube channel and I was just a backyard if I was just gardening in my backyard, just starting off, I would present myself that way: is, hey, come learn to garden with me. You know what I mean? I'm gonna have ups and downs, and maybe even ask questions in the comments for more experienced gardeners to help me. So I think it's about knowing who you are and presenting yourself as your real self, and then, from there being consistent with it. But but I think, I'm so thankful for this audience, because this audience allows me to do. You guys have allowed me to do so many different things, over the last 2 or 3 years, and I get to visit friends that I've had for a long time in this business more frequently than I would otherwise, and just all kinds of things as a result of you guys watching and listening. And so, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I mean, you're the reason I get to go to Mance in Baltimore in a couple weeks, you know. Very loud noise over here. I don't even know what that is. It's like the loudest blower ever, I guess. I guess he got a super blower for Christmas or something. I want a blower on steroids for Christmas. That's what I want. So I have no idea how loud this is going to be. I have my back to it, so maybe it won't be too bad. Okay, so somebody asked if it's possible for soil to be toxic for life because of chemicals that have been added, fertilizer that's been added, things have been added to it over time. This question was asked in response to my talk about new construction houses, you know, being having the soil be really poor for new construction. This thing is so loud. I have no idea what this guy's doing. Okay, so anyway, yes, definitely. There's no question that we've got some Roundup has become less effective over time. There's I read somewhere it was like 23 weeds or something. It may be more than that now that are just like completely resistant to it. Like mustard, you know, is the weed, mustard weed. It's completely resistant to Roundup and our glyphosate. And so we're seeing some other chemistry move in, you know, for herbicides that are longer lasting, unfortunately, in the soil. And yes, absolutely. You could inherit a property where somebody has over-limed it or overdone something to it or dumped 10-10-10 on it for 30 years. Okay, that noise just went away a bit. Yes, and they've been working on this project for like 4 years or something, and slowly but surely it is getting a little bit better. But the only thing that can solve those kinds of things is that kind of soil life that I'm talking about, that beneficial bacteria and microbes. So you know, using compost, using wood chips, using all of those things, and let the natural, you know, life of the soil, you know, just kind of come back on its own over some period of time. Those chemicals will eventually break down, but there are much longer lasting chemicals. There's a lot of lawsuits too, back and forth. I had a nursery that I bought some things from my garden center. This was maybe 5 years ago in a lawsuit with a farmer next door to them that's oversprayed into their mums a herbicide. And it was a herbicide, again, it was like one of these step up things where Roundup wasn't working for them in their soybean field anymore, and so they were putting some other herbicide in with it as well that caused the problem. And the herbicide didn't sit down. What it was on this particular case was that one of the things about glyphosate is when they use it over Roundup ready corn, Roundup ready soybeans, the crops that they use it over, it sits down really quickly. So the tractor moves over the field and sprays the Roundup. It just for whatever reason, it sits down really quickly onto the ground. This other chemical does not sit down as well, and so if it's a windy day, it blew over to their place. So, you know, and then you know, it was a really, really nasty event. It was on their fall mums. But anyway, yes, you can inherit soil and you can inherit compost. We hear a lot about toxic compost too, where fence lines get sprayed with these types of herbicides, and then cows or horses or whatever eat those things, and then that manure ends up in the compost. You can have toxic compost. Okay, so where would I go for the ideal climate, and what would I want to grow if I had an unlimited budget? I think I am in the ideal climate for what I do. I think the Pacific Northwest is fantastic. I'm really down the coast, you know, all the way to San Francisco. But they do get seasonal rainfall, and I don't think I would want seasonal rainfall. I don't think I'd want to go months without rain every year. So I really would want to be in a place where it could potentially rain 12 months out of the year. You know, I don't want it raining all the time, but I want the sun out. So we have lots of sunny days here, but we get regular rainfall, and we get somewhere between 45 and 50 inches or something like that on average. It's kind of, I like this clay-based soil. In fact, if I was buying property for some sort of garden, I'd want some clay there. I think it's so nutrient dense. It's a little harder for us to dig in and and play with, and it probably limits some plants that I could grow. But this band probably from Washington, D.C., down Interstate 95 and across to maybe North Georgia, Northwest South Carolina, all the Piedmont area is what it's called, over to North Alabama and even North Mississippi probably would be kind of ideal conditions, along lower part of Appalachia and up. I just think it's the perfect place, because we can try lots of things. I can, grow things that might be considered, partially tropical, although windmill palms one of the more cold tolerant palms. But I have a palm behind me, and then I have, things that grow in zone 4 and 5 and that kind of thing too. So it's a place where I can try more things. And so I do feel very fortunate, when I'm unboxing a big box of plants, that the plants I'm showing off aren't necessarily for, we can just try so much more here overall, I think, than most places in the country without seasonal rainfall. And also, it's the difference between your low temperature and your high temperature matter a lot. So my average low temperature here, I think 13 is the coldest I've been since I've been at this house, but we can go to 0. But typically our cap on our summer temperatures is somewhere around 98, more typical average day around 91, 92 with some humidity, and the humidity helps these plants too. So my temperature range over the course of the year is pretty narrow. It's not narrow like San Francisco narrow, but it's narrower than, let's say, someplace in Oklahoma, where it might get to 110 literally every summer and then be, close to 0. That the more span in the temperature you have, the less plants that you can grow, so that narrower that span is, the better for taking out the extremes. So enough words on that, but I think I am in the best place, and it's just a band that goes along through what we call the Piedmont area of the East here. So somebody talked about snapdragons surviving winter and summer, and I've always talked about them as using them as annuals, or winter annuals, and that's how I use them. Is I plant them this time of year or back closer to October, and then I use them through the winter and into the spring and early summer, and then I typically remove them for summer annuals. They will survive the summer here. Typically, in a little bit of shade is where they ideally would grow if I was growing them during the summertime. So every time I have one survive the summer, it's always in some place where it's buried in some other things. Same thing with my pansies. I had pansies live the entire year this past year, but they were under other annuals that I planted later. I had my pansies were, because they got absolutely nuked on that December freeze in 22. They didn't look good until about mid-April, and I didn't want to pull them out, so I planted my other annuals right over top of them, my summer annuals, and then a bunch of the pansies just survived up underneath them. So with a little bit of shade, even my pansies will stay the year as well. But sometimes I'm saying something I'm using the word annual because I'm treating it as an annual, but it's actually a perennial plant somewhere else, or has the potential to survive longer than in the garden than I'm leaving it. So yeah, I'm confusing people there. So somebody bought a bunch of unique camellias, but they're in quart pots. Should they plant into a larger container first before they place them in the ground? I actually planted quart camellias last year that I rooted, a variety that I'm going to name here at some point. And I'll show you the flower on them. They're buds on them right now, but I just plant them in the spring. So if you wanted to, you can put those camellias in the ground, but I just wait until, late April after your last potential, bad freeze or frost during the winter time. Or it's up to you. You can put them into a container. I just wouldn't put them into like a potting soil mix. You'd be best to use some sort of bark mix, some sort of nursery mix, if you can find it, to plant them in. If you put them in some sort of peat moss, whatever they came in those quart pots, you'll see it's like some sort of bark in that container. Be careful with a lot of these woody plants. If you go and buy a potting soil, it's probably going to keep your shrubs too wet, potentially keep your shrubs too wet. Not 100%, but possibly you could end up overwatering them. Okay, so somebody said they bought some wilt proof. I talked about this a couple weeks ago, spraying wilt proof on your plants to keep the wind damage off of them during the winter time. Prevent some wilt, some damage from winter winds. A lot of nurserymen will use, these types of things if they're growing arborvitae and things out in the middle of a field someplace, and where the wind can really whip across them. But it says on there to make sure that they're hardened off before you spray them. This is an issue because arborvitae, cedars, junipers, they tend to grow in the fall and in the spring. They don't grow a lot during the summertime. They go into kind of a summer dormancy. But I can tell you, this arborvitae, full growth right now, okay? And it's December. You do need to, and it says on there that you're not supposed to do it while they're growing. So it's gonna have to have some mid-20s, low-20 nights on them before you'd wanna spray them, for sure. And so I think it's probably closer to January before you'd be spraying with wilt proof, which is typically, from Christmas to about the 15th of January is typically that worst of the winter. If you're going to have something horrible, it's going to be usually in this window coming up for the next few weeks. That should be the time where these conifers have stopped growing as well. Let's see, that was number 12. Somebody said with below freezing temps, can you plant perennials still in 8B or wait until it's warmer? So I'm assuming they're talking about herbaceous perennials that have died back to the pot. If you're planting hosta or daylilies or the really, really tough perennials, you could absolutely put them in the ground right now. If you're talking about grasses, perennial grasses, I've talked about, I don't like to plant them while they're dormant. And so if you don't know from the mix of what you have, I might wait until April. But if you had, the best way to learn about gardening is to go out and kill some things. So if you wanted to put them in the ground and determine what comes back or what not, you'll now know which ones do and don't, right? You're tough, if you've bought really tough kind of perennials that that are the kind of plant and forget perennials, again, hosta being, an example that always comes to my brain just because they're just so rugged. Typically, and outside of some virus issues and some other, deer, they're pretty tough plants. I plant them, I would plant them dormant without any problem. But if you don't know from the things you have whether they're kind of tough things or not, just hold on to them until, mid-April and plant them then, or 1st of April for you in Zone 8B. So somebody asked me how I feel about Crape Murder. This is the operation, toward the end of winter where people cut their crepe myrtles back to, completely saw them off, literally just saw them off at 8 feet or 10 feet or 12 feet or whatever. A lot of what the folks that are doing this are seeing it in commercial settings where, in commercial parking lots, what they want to do is have the crepe myrtles all in that blooming at the exact same size, blooming at the exact same time, blooming the exact same way, and the trees all being identical in a parking lot. And so they're seeing landscapers do it, but the landscaper also plans that probably in a 10-year cycle or so, they're gonna replace almost everything in that parking lot. So you're planting this installation and you're putting in pretty good sized crepe myrtles right out of the gate, but 10, 15 years from now, they're gonna go out there and pull them up and they're gonna plant something else. So it does, this pollarding is what it's called of these crepe myrtles, where you keep cutting them off, they get these knots on the top of them. It doesn't really shorten the life of the plant. They're very old plants in Europe that have been cut back like this repeatedly, year over year, for a long, long time. So it's not really shortening the life of the tree, but it is making the tree look kind of weird. I mean, you end up with, trunks that are, this big around, and then, these little skinny branches up on the top. So there's not a lifespan shortening, but there's certainly it looks good for a little while, and then all of a sudden it looks really weird. But it's not my tree, and it doesn't bother me. You just, the main thing with this is you've ended up having to cut them off because the wrong crepe myrtle was planted there. That's the actual answer to this question, is we have dwarf crepe myrtles, semi-dwarf crepe myrtles, middle size, and then we have giant crepe myrtles like Natchez and others. So if you plant Natchez crepe myrtle on your foundation, that's going to be a 40-foot tree someday. If you don't, do the Crape Murder thing, but you could plant, maybe Catawba crepe myrtle on there, which is considered more of a semi-dwarf, and it'd probably still try to get 25 feet in time, but it will grow much slower and it's much easier to keep smaller. So it's really the right plant, right place, and you wouldn't have to do this as much. But again, it's not my plant. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. People make a big deal out of this, but I always think that if it makes that person happy to have that tree, looking identical every single year, go for it. But most of what you're seeing is people copying something that they're seeing done in parking lots for trees that are their lives are almost being intentionally shortened, because they're not going to leave that crepe myrtle in that parking lot for 25 or 30 years. Most of the things in commercial properties like that are going to get flipped out over time. But again, it doesn't bother me. Let's see. Somebody's in Georgia and they've got a shady space and they want a mixed border screen. I talk about using a mixture of screening plants all the time. In a shady space in, middle, they're in that part of Georgia where I'm talking about, that kind of sweet spot where there's clay soils and, slightly north of Atlanta there. Just a great place to experiment with lots of plants. But you could grow Elysium, camellias, American hollies, wax myrtles, English laurels, cherry laurels, Carolina cherry laurels would work great. There's actually quite a few things that you can grow in that shady space that's evergreen. When your biggest issue will be that you're planting around established tree roots, and those established tree roots are going to try to kill the plants that you're planting. So you have to water for some ongoing period of time until they're established. It just takes longer to establish things in those types of spaces. That'll be your big issue. But there's plenty of plants available out there in the world to do a mixed border in a part shade or shade situation like that are evergreen. So somebody has a fire pit area and they've taken it out, I guess, and then that area has what they're going to call alkaline soil from having the fire pit there for so long, and wanted to know what plants they can use in alkaline soils. Well, boxwoods are definitely on that list. But see, one thing that concerns me is they've made an assumption, maybe they tested it, I don't know, that space has alkaline soil now. I've always talked about, when you lime something, it's temporary. The soil will become acidic again if you use sulfur to try to make something, more acidic. Then it's going to become more alkaline in the future. It just bounces right back. So that ash from that fire pit, I suspect, will probably end up doing the same thing. It might be the ash itself is very alkaline, but the soil underneath it, where the plants are going to be rooting out into, is likely not. So I would test that soil and make sure that it's actually alkaline before you go down the road of trying to find plants that only grow in alkaline soils. But boxwoods are on that list. There's a lot of plants. I mean, you can quickly Google plants for alkaline soils and find that a lot of these plants are more adaptable probably than we think. But don't assume anything. Base anything you're adding or doing in your garden, base it on a soil test. Okay. So somebody asked about companion plants in a wet area with hibiscus. So they've got native hibiscus that just love wet areas, tend to grow in almost when I see them in the wild, water, areas where there's seasonal flooding and that kind of thing is where we'll see a lot of native hibiscus throughout the southeast United States. What other perennials can they grow in this space? Well, we have lots of, pickerel weed, I see growing in the water, swamp milkweed, swamp sunflowers. If I stood here a while, you can quickly Google what perennials will grow in wet spaces. But I talked about a few weeks back that there's a difference between the roots that are water roots that are capable of growing in very wet spaces and then the regular roots that typically grow on plants that aren't in wet spaces. And a lot of plants are capable of growing both kinds of roots. And so when you buy a plant and it's supposed to grow in wet spaces, it won't necessarily go from that container into that wet space and survive. This is a different type of roots. It has to re-root water roots. So regardless, I would plant up high a little bit in that space and let the roots go down into that water on their own, but let it form new roots to go down into that wet space. But there are lots and lots of things that will grow in wet feet. And it's amazing to me, a lot of our great native plants, when I see them in the wild, a ton of them are just growing in the water. Clethra grows in the water. You know, just going through some shrubs here. Clethra, only ever seen it in areas where it floods occasionally, in floodplain areas around creeks and streams, lakes, ponds, that kind of thing. Itea, I've only seen it ever growing in water, along streams, banks, that kind of thing. Cephalanthus, for sure, I've only ever seen it literally growing in the water, in the wild. So it's kind of interesting, a lot of our native plants. But again, when I grow that plant in a nursery, in a container like this camellia is, the roots are going to be different on that plant, having been grown in a container. And if I go and stick it in the water, because I've seen it growing in the water, that plant's going to die for sure. It needs to be mounded up some, and then it chooses to go down in the water, you know, as it takes on new roots or grows new roots. Okay, so somebody used cardboard in their landscape a year and a half ago, and then put wood chips over top of it, and it just hasn't broken down a whole lot. I've talked about, again, I'll talk about this cardboard thing occasionally because I know how many people do it. I just know how many people out there, do the cardboard box thing, and then put their mulch over top, plant and then put the mulch over top of it, to create their beds, to kill some of those perennial weeds that I talked about in last week's video. But it does, and I've said this, create a dry socket between the soil down below and whatever you're doing on top. And that's what you have going on. It's all likelihood. It was a drier year overall for us here, although we've had 10 inches of rain in 2 rains. Since I put up a video talking about how dry it was. We've had 2 just flood condition rains the last 2 Sundays. Overall, it was a much drier year. And if I'd have put down cardboard and then I'd have put down mulch over top of it, if I wasn't giving that any additional water, I think it would have had a hard time, that cardboard breaking down. So I don't like to put that barrier in there because the whole purpose of this thing is to improve the soil. That cardboard is temporarily going to prevent that mulch from improving that soil. Those of you with perennial weeds, it makes sense, to put some barrier down to make sure that those things are going to hopefully die while that cardboard is breaking down. So I totally, again, I'm not knocking it at all, but it is a slowdown in the process of that having to break down. And if it was abnormally dry the last year and a half, wherever you are, that's probably why the cardboard hasn't broken down and really started the process of that bark breaking down and improving your soil. So that's what that is. Again, I'm not knocking it. I mean, I know lots and lots of people do it, and they've seen videos of it, and it works fine. But it is a slowdown of what we're trying to accomplish ultimately. Somebody's in Zone 8B in Texas, and they don't have a grow light system for their to start their seeds. Can you just do them other ways? Yeah, a lot of people do the winter sowing method outdoors, so you can Google that, or look it up on YouTube. Any of the outdoor winter sowing techniques. A lot of people, it became the thing like 3 years ago. Winter sowing works great. It's incredible how a seedling can germinate outdoors in too cold of conditions, and genetically it's built to wake up and go, uh-oh, it's cold out here, and then kind of freeze a little bit in place and wait for the proper time for it to start growing again. It's kind of interesting, really, as well as just an experiment. But yeah, you can do winter sowing, is what people call it. So somebody said, can you leave hosta crowns exposed, or should you top them with mulch in the wintertime? Most hosta, that's how they're going to go to sleep. I've got some over here, and it wouldn't take much to go down in those leaves and see those little crowns sticking up. I'll leave that up to you. If I was in a really cold area, I might want to have some leaves or some mulch sitting over the top of them. I never even thought about them here. It's just not that big of a deal. And I'm leaving the leaves on the ground, so that is my mulch that's over the top of them for the winter time. Somebody wants a hydrangea paniculata that turns pink here in the south before it turns brown, and that's coming through plant breeding. I grew one forever called Pinky Winky, but I never saw it pink here in the south, and it was one of the original ones that just kind of went from that green coloration that those flowers have initially to white to pink to brown, but it would never do that here. It takes cooler nighttime temperatures to produce that pink coloration, but we're seeing plant breeding. I think that one is called Starlight or something like that. That Southern Living Plant Collection one is that they're going to have, and that's what it's been bred for. It had pink coloration down in Mobile last year when I saw it, which was kind of crazy that it would be all the way down there, or in South Alabama, that it would get that coloration. So that's progress coming on hydrangea paniculatas for sure. Somebody asked me the most nutritious mulches for spring mulching in Florida, and that kind of doesn't matter where you are, but the ones, if you don't have anything planted in that area and it's a new bed space, I mean, I do like to use wood chips initially just to have that. It's like really hard to break wood down, and so it like lights a fire in the soil to break this stuff down, and you get all these beneficial things kind of waking up and growing very quickly to break this material down in a fast way. It's like it's just like turning on a jet engine on your soil. Once you have existing beds in place, any kind of I like to use hardwood mulch because hardwood mulch typically is going to have some combination of wood and bark fiber in it. And so it's typically the hardwood trees. It's the bark off a hardwood tree as they're making lumber or whatever they're making out of it, but it does end up including some wood. So that double shredded or triple shredded hardwood mulch is definitely my favorite. The other just bark mulches, like pine bark mulch, I mix in for my annuals and that kind of thing, and I'll top dress beds just to cover them for the winter or something, but it tends to float. And if you're in zone 9B in Florida, if you did all of your area with like mini nuggets or nuggets, pine bark mini nuggets or something like that, the first 5-inch thunderstorm you have is going to move them about the garden some, and I don't think that would be particularly fun. But if you can find any kind of hardwood mulch product, I think is the top. Pine straw is definitely going to be available for you, and it's perfectly fine for mulching with. And if I had pines here and pine straw was falling, I'd absolutely use it. I'd love to use it in my paths back here, but I don't think it adds to the soil as much as the wood mulches do. It's mostly water. You'll find that it really shrinks very quickly because the water evaporates out of it after you put it down, and so it doesn't add a whole lot. It would take decades to really build soil using pine straw. Okay, so somebody said I cut the lantanas. Cleanup video this week, I cut the lantana back in the front garden, and they had always heard you needed to wait until late winter. That's pretty much true. If I planted one this year and it was the first year in the ground, I probably wouldn't have cut it back, but those have been out there for a couple years now, and they're like tanks. I mean, they are just big, gigantic, rooted in things. It would actually be kind of interesting to dig one out at this point. They just have anchored themselves in, so they're not going to have any problem surviving. And I kind of weighed the need for getting them cut back and getting them off of a couple of other plants that they were negatively impacting, going through the winter. And I walked past this house in a neighborhood that's not far from here frequently, and noticed this lady 3 or 4 years ago, cutting back her lantana basically to nubs as soon as we had a first frost in not September, but late October. It's just immediately, as soon as they slowed down in any way whatsoever, she cut them to the ground, and they cut back beautifully every year. So it got me thinking that, well, maybe this one's just an overblown kind of thing. I think an established lantana, you can cut it back anytime between the first frost and the first of spring, and you're not going to kill it. Again, one that I planted that first year, I may go best practice and wait until late winter. Let's see. Let's find one more on here for this week. Somebody's in Zone 5 in Colorado, and squirrels and rabbits are chewing the bark off of some of the bottom of their plants. Will it kill the plants? Yeah, it definitely could. You definitely would not want the wood girdled all the way around for sure. So if there's some way that you can put, some sort of, screen or fence or some sort of cover over the top of some small things in the meantime till they get some size on them. Otherwise, if they go all the way around the bark on the bottom of one of those things, they're just, any of your plants, it will likely kill them. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for participating in this question and answer video. Again, Merry Christmas. Ask gardening questions down below. And we'll be back on New Year's Eve. So we've got Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve Q&As this year. And also, again, last chance to save $60 on the Learn to Garden video series. Once you buy it, you own it. You don't have to pay anything else, and you're going to continue to get videos through 2024. You don't have to watch commercials. You don't have to watch ads. If you've held on to this video this long, you've probably seen a few ads. You don't have any ads over there on the Learn to Garden video series. The discount code is DEC60. Thanks for watching.